The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Well, welcome to Chic Chattin with Jocelyn, but I'm not Jocelyn. I'm Karen Testerman, and substituting for my great friend and fellow co-host. And tonight with me, I have Marianne Alliegro, who is, let me get my notes real quick. Marianne is a mother, she's a sister, she's a real special person in many, many ways. She has been the co-founder of the Liberty Chalkboard. She's a scientist and an educator. Primarily, she is a career cell and molecular biologist with training in microbiology and virology. And she has decades of technical experience ranging in screening and PCR to laser microsurgery and genome sequencing. Now you know why I'm reading this. She is eminently qualified to evaluate the claims of the government and pharmaceutical scientists. So welcome to Chic Chattin with Jocelyn.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much.
That was a little clumsy,
that was very gracious. I'm also a wife.
She's a wife and a mother, and the wife of, we're both wives of state representatives. So it's kind of a mutual friendship that we've developed over the past several years. Marianne is here because she actually attended the January 6th event, and we hear a lot on the media about what's going on, and there are people that are still being incarcerated without having their constitutional privileges, their rights being exercised. They've been held in prison for quite some time. And so I wanted to get a different perspective on what really happened, and Marianne was actually there. So tell us a little bit about why did you go in the first place?
Okay, so in the first place, it was very last minute. The president put out a call and asked patriots to come to be at the Capitol so that when the electors were certified or not certified, that our legislators would know that the people of the country knew that something may have happened during our election, because as anybody who was alive and breathing could tell that something had happened during that election. And we were going to stand by our Constitution and stand for our country and make sure that everything was done correctly. So when he asked us to come, one of my friends and I were at a meeting, as a matter of fact, and looked at each other and said, we should go. And I looked at Mark and I said, I want to go. And he said, okay. That was it. It was so easy. And so my friend happened to be a veteran, my neighbor and friend. And so she was able to get us onto one of the veteran buses that left New Hampshire. We left the evening before. We were in that bus on those tiny little seats all night long and into the morning with only a couple of stops because they really had to make tracks. And we arrived in Washington around 7 a.m. Started out at the beginning. We were, the bus station is behind the Capitol building, and what we had to do was cross the entire mall all the way to the Washington Monument, which was from our bus station at least a mile and a half, maybe a little bit more. As we were approaching the Capitol building, you could see all the barricades around it neatly. And, do not cross because, of course, it's our Capitol. And so that was neatly cordoned off as it normally would be on a regular day when it wasn't open for visitors. And there were a few police officers in the street hanging around their cruiser. having coffee, just standing there. And as the group of us from the bus were coming by, one of them casually said to us, just be careful out there. Antifa's already causing some trouble. And we thought that was kind of interesting because the mall looked empty to us, but of course the crowd was probably already assembling where the president was going to speak at the Ellipse, which was even beyond the Washington Monument.
So do you think he was talking about the Capitol building itself, or do you think it was...
it sounded like he was talking about further down where people were congregating. It sounded that way. But we just thought that was kind of odd.
Yeah.
So we continued walking on down. We noticed that there were no bathrooms. There were no porta potties at all. There were no food vendors. There was nowhere to get water. We're glad that we had brought packs. We all brought a pack, so we had a little bit of water and some jerky and things like that in it. And there were no other police, really, except for the few that were hanging around at the front there, just past the bus station and near the Capitol building. We also noticed that there were some trucks in the middle of the mall parked, like almost like pickups, you know, like we have up here. And then there were a few Trump signs on the trucks, it looked like. There was nobody around them, and we thought that was kind of odd. But then there were these huge trailer-type trucks that didn't have a rig in front, and they almost looked like they should be like an emergency vehicle. And at first we thought maybe that's an emergency vehicle, but then we realized that it wasn't a driving type vehicle like that. Instead, it looked more like, you know, we spent a lot of years in Louisiana. My family lived there for a while, and we were near New Orleans. And when the movie crews would come in, they'd have these big vans. That was the size of what these trucks were. There were about 2 or 3 of them, like almost like huge vans to change in. And we noticed that. That was odd. There was really nobody around them. And we just continued on our way down. And when we finally got to the crowd, we were not the first ones there. So that means people were assembling very early in the morning. And we were all the way back at the Washington Memorial, the Washington Monument, even though the crowd extended all the way down to the Ellipse and where the president was going to be speaking later.
Wow.
So
There was still, and this was around 8 o'clock in the morning.
by the time we got down there, it was probably 8:15.
So it's about a half an hour walk from the Capitol to the Capitol building itself down to the where.
Yes, and we weren't running because, you know, some of us were obviously not exactly spring chickens, and then there was some people on canes, so we would take, you know, not walking really fast down there. So we decided to stay up near the monument, and there were some big stone benches around the monument, and so the people that needed to rest were going to sit on those benches. It was cold and damp. It was quite a chilly day, kind of misty in the air the whole time and a little bit windy, so we were pretty chilly and tired by then, especially after being cramped in the buses, you know.
Yeah.
That's
a good 8.5 hour drive down.
Oh, yeah. It took longer, I think, because we had 2 stops on the way down, and I think it ended up being, I don't know, you do the numbers. We left around 9, and it took us till about 7.
Yeah.
So that did quite a while,
Yeah. It's a good 10 hours.
Yeah, right, in the bus. And then we heard that there were some porta potties down by the Ellipse where the president was going to speak. But that was quite a long walk.
Right.
So I just kind of held it.
Yeah.
for that part. And they had a big screen going. They had a couple of them, and so you could hear the music, and they had some speakers in the morning. But by the time the president did speak, everybody was pretty cold and
that was closer to noontime?
Yes, actually noon or 1 by the time he spoke, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
it was getting closer to there.
So were you able to find any place where you could sit down or anything like that?
Yeah, no, only because the ground was wet and damp, so some people probably did have blankets. We didn't. I didn't really have stuff like that with me, but we were sitting on the stone bench, and actually there was some law enforcement. I take it back a little bit. They were the forest rangers, and they came out of the Washington Monument and asked everybody to leave the premises because we didn't have tickets. And
so I'm visualizing the Washington Monument because I've been there before with this. It's a big park surrounded by flagpoles, all
Yes.
with the American flag flying on them. And it's a knoll where you
Correct.
can really go up. And so they were saying that because you didn't have tickets to go into the monument, you couldn't sit there.
Right. And of course, these benches were very far from the actual building. They
Yeah.
were nowhere near the
Oh,
building.
yeah, they're quite
Right.
a ways away.
Yes. So that was the one point, I would say that was the one point of dissension the whole day that we noticed, because several of the veterans and other people stood up and looked at the rangers and said, our monument, our
Nice.
monument,
Yeah.
we will stay.
Yeah.
We will stay.
Good for them. Good
yes.
for them.
And,
Yeah.
and with their canes and all, I believe they had the right to stay and sit and
Exactly.
relax.
Well, they
Yeah.
fought for that,
That's
the whole
exactly
thing.
right.
So after, what's inspired you most about what the president had to say when he finally started speaking?
Well, so it was obviously a call to protect our republic. I know it had to do with the election, and it had to do with the integrity of the election. And yes, I'll be honest, I definitely felt like there was no integrity in that election. So I know there were great problems, and the fact that nobody in our country was addressing them, they were totally ignoring them, was very troublesome. But as far as the mood, everybody was in a great mood. The president was in a good mood like he always is. There was a lot of love in the air. There were actually a lot of prayers going on, too. There were a lot of people praying. Apparently, some groups were literally praying the rosary during the day. And as they're marching back and forth, as we were walking back and forth, rather, between along the mall. And basically, he started going through all of the abnormalities in voting, what states they found thousands and thousands of ballots, and how, just reminding everybody of how when all the voting stopped and the counting stopped and all of a sudden votes switched and hundreds of thousands of votes showed up, and how that was like in a black box, literally. Where did they come from? And he started going through what they have found in many states up to that point, which was tens of thousands of dead voters. Literally, they had gone through the numbers, or people mail-in votes with no signatures. There were thousands upon thousands. And he was going through every state and listing it, and it was really fascinating to hear it again. And then basically he called for everyone, that the country had to stick together, had to follow through with this, that we can't just look ahead to 2024 until we fix 2020, because why should anything be different?
Right.
If they get away with it now, all the cheating, that's never going to stop. And that was very clear, and everybody obviously agreed with that. Again, everybody was in a wonderful, nice mood. He said, now we're going to march down to the Capitol, and we're going to make sure that our legislators know that they have the support of the country behind them, essentially, that we are going to go and give them a backbone, is the way I've looked upon that.
And so did you see anything that was disruptive, or, because we hear that once people got up to the Capitol, of course, there was activity that went on. But prior to that, and as you were walking down to the Capitol.
So red flags, things like red flags. Okay, so earlier walking around, we did see small groups of people wearing black hats, black jackets, type vesty, black pants.
Did you think those were the Antifa people
Yes.
that the police were referring to? Right?
Maybe. They weren't doing anything, but they were definitely walking around in small groups, and we were a bunch of little old ladies, and we tried to avoid them. Okay, we tried to avoid that situation. Any of the Trump supporters that we saw did not look anywhere aggressive or fearful or anything, but just enjoying each other. That was apparent. There were some Q people around. There were a lot of Q people around too.
How do you recognize Q people?
They're vocal about it.
Oh, okay.
They're very vocal about it. And they weren't, again, not aggression, but they were definitely resolved. They were resolved, let's put it that way. And also, I would say in general, I've been asked this before, and I think that the mood of the crowd was prayerful resolve in general, because I was resolved too. Anybody that was there made that long and arduous trip to stand for the Republic of the United States of America.
Right.
And not let it be gone under, because we know there are enemies, both foreign and domestic, at play. We've known that for years, not just this incident. And the thought of not even standing up for a country was unthinkable. Like, you just had to be there. You just had to be there. And I think that's how everybody felt that was there. So outside of that, the little groups of people, one other thing happened that was a little bit of a oddity. Just before the president stopped speaking, a group about a third of the way down the huge crowd, so there were hundreds of thousands of people, but you could see a group break off and move towards the Capitol. From where I was, they did not have a lot of red on, so they didn't look Trumpy to me, and I didn't know who they were, though. And again, in my mind, it's flashing. I wonder if it's those kind of Antifa guys hanging around. And we had heard, scuttlebutt. We had heard scuttlebutt during the day of Antifa, of busloads of Antifa people coming in at night. So we weren't surprised to see people in odd clothes mixing in with the other people. The other thing I just want to mention, the other group of people that were there were amazing. They were Chinese people. A lot of them didn't even speak English. They were fully American supporters, fully Trump supporters. They were so nice and helpful. And they were there because they did not want us to fall into communism, because they were running away from the Communist Chinese Party. And that was really cool.
Yeah.
Actually, that was really cool.
Well, we have a couple of those patriots in New Hampshire now. I know Chow Kelly is from Vietnam, and she has her father is here with her. He survived the Vietnam era, and she talks very, very adamantly about not wanting to take America in that direction and fighting to keep us free and to maintain our liberties. And then we have the other one is Lily Tang Williams.
Yes.
And Lily is from China, and she made a conscious decision to come to America and actually to lie to the communist government about whether or not she was going to return.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for her. How brave.
She's got quite a story, and it's but she's very she's been going around to the schools and explaining to our children in schools about why it's important to fight for liberty and to maintain it, because she grew up in communism.
Yes.
And why it's so important for us to be the free country that we are supposed to be. Although of late we've been experiencing some of the tyranny that we really don't want to. So on your way back, what did you experience?
So on the way back, again, I saw some people saying the rosary. Okay, and we're all filing back. We were all anticipating a speech, actually. We were anticipating to continue the rally, to just listen to someone else speak outside the Capitol building. But when we arrived, the barriers were all gone, totally gone.
Right.
There wasn't one. It was very inviting, as if just keep coming on in. And you can see that some people are closer than other people. We stood out there for quite a while on the other side of the water, and then we said, well, let's get closer so we can hear whoever's speaking. We thought they were going to be speaking from the top balcony.
Okay.
So we kind of moved in closer. And it was about that time when we got closer that I got a message on my phone from my daughter saying, Mom, get out of there. Something's going on.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So here's a picture of the Capitol that you were talking about on your way back.
Yes.
As you're approaching it.
Yeah.
Right? And then here's another picture.
Just everyone standing around still, just mulling around, waiting for something, again, waiting for the rally to continue or something to happen. Speaking of the news, everything on the news, where's the news? I'm sorry, where's the news? They weren't there all day. Where's
interesting.
the news media?
Yeah.
Where are the big Fox News trucks and where are the big CNN trucks? They're nowhere. And they weren't.
Right. And so then you...
So who took all the pictures that supposedly showed up later is interesting to me. But anyway.
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the things that we find is that there's a lot of footage. With this many people and all of their cell cameras, their cell phones and their fast cameras and so forth like that, there's a lot of other pictures that are going on. I want to take a moment to introduce two very short clips, but one's inside the Senate chambers and the other one is outside. And it's another view of what was being shown.
Hey! Fucking hey, man. Glad to see you guys. You guys are fucking patriots. Look at this guy. He's got covered in blood. God bless you.
Yes.
You good, sir? Do you need medical attention?
I'm good, thank you.
All right.
I got shot in the face. Where are they? I got shot in the face with some kind of plastic bullet.
Any chance I could get you guys to leave the Senate wing?
We will. I've been making sure they ain't disrespecting the place.
Okay, just want to let you guys know this is...
Hey! Why are you letting this happen? Why haven't you called for backup? Where is your backup? This is our damn Capitol building, and y'all are letting it get destroyed on your watch. Fuck all of you. Call for backup. Get some help down here.
So it's fascinating that you have someone here who's shouting at police who are obviously in riot gear, and they're not helping. He's asking, where are you? Why aren't you there? And the other one, which I thought was really interesting, that took place inside the Senate chambers there, you notice the police are not at all interacting. They're just following this guy through.
Correct.
And you've got an injured person that they casually apparently walk by and say, do you need any help?
True. And the other thing that was fascinating, I actually had friends from other states that were on the other side of the Capitol when all this was going down. And also a person from our bus who went immediately behind when our group was standing out in the front, literally saying that they saw the Capitol Police inviting people in. Come on in. So people thought they were going on a tour. Most of the people that were Trump supporters, at the beginning, the video where the glass is breaking, those people were there immediately and saw whoever was breaking in, asking the police to help, and they would not. Apparently, after that happened, the police were just waving people in. And so the innocent people just thought, okay, so I guess it is inside the event.
Well, so David and I have commented on it a couple of different times, because when you're down there in the Capitol, no matter what building you're going into, if it's the Capitol or it's the Senate building or the House of Representatives building, the office buildings, you go through metal detectors. You go through, you're putting anything that you're carrying onto the conveyor belt and possibly being scanned and so forth like that. None of that was apparent in any of the videos that you see, whether they're, I don't know, whoever takes them, whether they're the news videos or not. There's none of that in there, which is really quite fascinating.
As you see in that last video, the barriers aren't even there. It's not like they're broken on the ground and were trampled. That one right there with the grass. They're just gone.
There's no...
Those were all barriers there in the morning. Neatly,
interesting.
In an array.
Interesting.
They were totally gone, as if somebody neatly put them away. So who neatly put them away and why? To invite people. And something I did see, we did see the tear gas flying. Okay. So there were people standing around like us. They happened to be closer to the building, and for no reason, they were throwing tear gas down at them. Those people didn't even know what was happening.
Oh,
it's not like they were storming anything. They were standing there, and they didn't even know that they were getting tear gassed.
Right.
And for what reason, they didn't know.
So it's interesting, too, because there's the people who are incarcerated at this point, and the J6 group. And they actually have footage in other parts. So as you mentioned earlier, that's a huge building and it has many sides to it.
Right.
And so there were things going on other places where obviously some of the other people have video of it.
Yeah.
And when you see all of that and you spend the hours to actually go through it, it's a different picture than what we really know. Right?
Yes.
And we find out that things are not always as they're reported. So we're trying, one of the reasons that I wanted you on was to give this other side of things so that people will look into why it is, what it is you're doing.
Thank you. And that people will do the research
Yeah.
and seek the truth.
Right.
We have to seek the
So
truth.
where do you go for your research when you look?
As many different places as I can. I try to keep my mind open because I'm a scientist. I do data and research. I spent my whole career doing it. So I'll try to look in as many places as I can. And I will go on to the different sites. There's a lot of alternative media out there and a lot of alternative news, and I will give them good credence.
So we're going to
See what
take
they
a
do.
short break, and thank you so much, Marianne. And when we come back, we're going to go into another area where we need to seek truth on what's really happening. And this is Karen Testerman, and we're continuing our conversation with Marianne Alliegro. And Marianne is, as we said, a scientist, but she's been someone who has experienced a lot of different natural disasters, you might want to say. You've lived through quite a few. Tell us about the one that was most impactful to you.
Okay, I will. Yes.
Oh, and you can tell us which ones you've been through, because I know it's quite a list. It's amazing.
We don't have to go through the whole list. Well, let's face it. It's from historic blizzards to historic floods in southern Louisiana, a couple of tornadoes in Maryland, but we'll go to Katrina. We'll go to the queen of the hurricanes for the time that we did live in Louisiana. So my family was in Katrina. I say in Katrina. We were able to evacuate at the last minute. We started driving when the storm began, but we did eventually reach a safe haven before the storm hit.
Were you in just excuse me for interrupting,
Yes.
but were you in a long traffic? Was traffic really heavy at that point? Or?
No, the Alliegros are stubborn. We left after the storm started, so we caught up with our neighbors who left 8 hours before us in the traffic jam.
Oh,
so
okay.
yes, there was still a traffic jam, but we literally, it had been so diminished by the time we left our house that we actually were able to get within, we were already in a safe range by the time we caught up to our neighbors. And we were only going 60 miles. It's not like we were going very far. And it took that long to get anywhere. That's true.
Wow.
So our house was in Slidell, Louisiana, which is east of New Orleans, right across Lake Pontchartrain, the 5 Mile Bridge, and that is where the eye went over. Half of the eye wall took out Slidell near the water, and the other half was on the Mississippi. We were right on the Mississippi border, and the other half Biloxi. So it was a very large eye wall. I think it was 80 mile wide. It was a large storm, and so the first thing that is not a truth, because this is seeking the truth. So we got to seek the truth about the whole event. The whole made-up event of the Superdome was a very sad thing for New Orleans itself, because the political fallout from the way it was reported in the news as if it was some kind of a racial, horrible thing that happened was very devastating to the New Orleans area. New Orleans East stayed in ruins for years after the storm because of all the political meandering that went on after. But the reality of it is if you lived in the New Orleans area for as little as 6 weeks, you knew that there was no such thing as a shelter at the Superdome. It is not a shelter. It never was a shelter. It's called a place of last resort where families could go if they were trapped to just wait out the storm and then go back home. Of course, nobody expected the storm to be what it was. And so a lot of people got surprised. Literally, their cars that they drove to the Superdome washed away.
Wow.
So they could have driven away. You see what I'm saying? As far as people that stayed in New Orleans and stayed behind, That was another thing that was falsely reported by the news. So there were about 3 categories of people that didn't evacuate the city. It wasn't that Mayor Nagin didn't have enough transportation for them. That was bogus. Some people stayed because they had lived through Camille and they had lived through Betsy. These were other hurricanes in the area that were pretty dramatic. And so they figured they're going to just stay for Katrina too. That actually happened to some relatives of my brother, and they did lose their lives in the storm. Some stayed because of their pets, because they didn't want to leave their dogs or cats behind, and they're, in all honesty, in the emergency situation, they had to get the people out first. So that was sad as well, but that did happen in some cases. And then there were the third set of people that didn't leave because they wanted to do harm. And that is very true. We know that from rescuers, and when I say rescuers, I mean citizen volunteers who went in with their boats from the bayou to help rescue people and were attacked by people who were there to do harm and to loot. So they got trapped as well. So that's about your 3 categories that didn't leave the city. Otherwise, they evacuated a major city, over 90% of the population, in a very short period of time. The storm was coming in and turned quickly and all of a sudden blew up into this gigantic storm. We watched every hurricane. This one happened fast. We even got caught in Texas. We were taking the family for the weekend and then literally had to rush home before the storm hit and gave our hotel rooms to people that were evacuating. That's how fast this happened. Wow. Because we had to get our parrot. So, we literally went home to get the bird and take him with us on our adventure. But anyway, so that was one thing that was really, all of that was lied about in the mainstream news. The other thing was the aftermath. And they made it like it was this horrible event for people where they were all ugly and you saw the worst in people and on and on. It was the opposite. You saw the best in people. Where the storm actually hit and the eye went over, these towns were devastated. Over 80% of the homes in Slidell, Louisiana were damaged over 80% of their value. Let that sink in for a while.
Wow.
You had hundreds of thousands of homeless people, okay?
How big was
Slidell?
Slidell,
About
yeah.
70,000 altogether.
Okay.
Okay. So between that and the surrounding towns that were all affected, you had hundreds of thousands of homeless people, including the levee break, which of course wiped out parts of New Orleans. The other side of New Orleans where the levee didn't break also got wiped out. Lake Pontchartrain's big. The storm went through that way, and of course the waves came up the first side on one side and then back down the other side. So the other side of New Orleans was also wiped out.
Wow.
Those were very wealthy homes. They also got destroyed. None of that was on the news. They had boats in their front yards. I mean, it was amazing. You had refrigerators, boats, animals, clothes up in trees. It was an amazing sight. But the truth of it is the people pulled together. They helped each other. If you weren't living in someone else's house or your kids weren't being taken in by some of your neighbors or friends, then you had people living in your house. Meaning, if your house wasn't damaged, you took people into your house. Everybody did that. We all ate together. We all took care of each other.
Right.
We all met together. We cleaned each other's refrigerators. We picked each other up off the roof when we fell down and broke parts of our bodies. Everybody was helping everybody. Wow. Even the FEMA, they made this whole big deal on the news that nobody was helping. Not true. They were stationed just outside the storm area, and as soon as the storm passed, the trucks from all over the country, the utility trucks, plus FEMA, came in and started cutting trees that were in the road so that when men of our families we were all huddled together out in Lafayette area, they went in that very next morning and they could have never reached the house if those crews hadn't already been out in the middle of the night cutting a pathway.
Right.
So that they can get to people and help people, and people can get to their homes and assess the damage. So everybody pitched in. thank you for everybody around the country because people were amazing. They took our kids in their schools, they took our pets, they did what needed to be done while we all went back and tried to mitigate some of the damage to our homes and rebuild the communities, our communities.
So was there major damage to your house? Were you staying with somebody else?
Yes. Yeah, actually. So our house was flooded. And to say major, well, we were lucky we only had a foot of water in our house, but it sucks up the walls. So the key is to rip out carpet. Anybody who lives down there knows this stuff. Rip out that carpet, very heavy when it's soggy, and pull everything up that you can away from the walls. And so we were lucky we only had a gut from 4 feet down.
Wow.
We had our beautiful friends to this day, close friends. They housed my husband and I and all of 3 of the pets, or 4 of them, for 6 months.
Wow.
We all lived together. The kids were, my one daughter was with friends in Texas, so she could go to college in Texas at that time. So the kids, we all had to be separated. That's how all the families were. It was kind of sad.
Yeah.
But you couldn't get your house repaired for quite a while. That took a long time. You lost a lot of stuff. That's just the way it was. And some people lost everything. We lost about half of it. It didn't matter. That's not what was important. You realize that God is the most important thing. You realize that your family is the next important thing. And you realize your country is the next important thing. And everything got put into perspective. And, you know, Mardi Gras went on. The people of New Orleans area are so beautiful. They had no money to build these beautiful costumes that you all see on TV for Mardi Gras and all the fancy stuff that they do. Instead, they built costumes out of blue tarp. And people went down the street parading as rotten refrigerators. It was wonderful. And everybody loved it. Everybody loved it. It was like it was like a brotherhood. It was really wonderful. People really helped each other, built up each other. We'd go around with our Saints shirts on. We'd been wearing the same shirt for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. You had like only 2 pairs of shorts and a pair of jeans and a few T-shirts.
Right.
That's what you had.
Yeah.
And you kept wearing it. We washed them in between. You kept wearing it, but that's the way it was. And you'd see people when the grocery stores finally opened. Thank you, by the way, to the National Guard who fed us with the MREs. We lived on those for weeks, and water, ice, and blue tarps. That's all we needed.
I hope the MREs were a little bit more recently dated. So we got a hold of one.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, from an event that my husband and I went to, and because he was in the military himself. The host had asked him to come over and help with the cutting of the meat, making sure that the meat was appropriate, right? That's one of the rituals they go through. And so as a gift to him for having done that, they gave him an MRE. Well, this MRE, I think, was from 1990 or sometime way back when.
Oh, how funny.
Well, we gave it to our grandson for Christmas, we figured he'd really enjoy that. So he cut it open. It was
good?
Not at all good at that point.
It wasn't good.
It was way beyond its but it is interesting because most of the guys in the military will tell you those MREs are not the best in the world. I mean, they help you survive, but that's about it.
We learned to enjoy them.
Yeah.
And we would all get together in the neighborhood and have our MREs together at night when we could. We definitely learned to enjoy them. We still saved a couple, so I'm interested to know if they're any good anymore. Probably not. Maybe we shouldn't eat them and just save them. But we did save a couple.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting to see what it is. And so David had cut it all open. It was kind of funny. But so in addition to having survived Katrina, you also have gone through blizzards.
Oh, yes.
And hurricane, I mean, not just hurricanes, but tornadoes as well.
A couple of tornadoes. So the tornado, the one that was closest to us literally this is Maryland, the Baltimore area. We lived a little outside of Baltimore at the time, Reisterstown, right near the horse country, a lot of pretty horse country around there. Got out of work, picked up the kids, because we were working at a hospital at that time, and picked up, the kids were right there in the little daycare at that hospital. and it was one of those skies, and we're like, oh, not nice out. And boy, there were terrible storms on the way home, and we kept getting rerouted. We couldn't make it home because there'd be big trees down or this or that. And finally, we wiggled our way through, and the police were, by the time we got to our actual town, the sirens were just going, and they were trying to get rid of us. And we said, no, we live there. We're going home. And they did let us go home. Well, it turned out this amazing little tornado literally jumped over our house. So it took 14 trees from our neighbor's little farm. The woman who lived there was an older woman, thank God. She was asleep upstairs and her hearing aid wasn't in. She didn't hear a thing. And all the trees around the house were decimated, and not one went through her window. God bless her. She ended up being fine.
Oh, wow.
The kids and the mom were hiding in their basement because they heard it, but they couldn't wake her up. So they hid. And anyway, they were all okay. Just popped over our house literally, and then crossed the street, took a roof off of a grocery store, and there were people. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So people shopping. It was very fortunate nobody died in this storm.
Wow.
And then it just hit the neighborhood across from that store and just raced right through the neighborhood, cutting the backs of houses on both sides. So a week later or so, when we actually finally drove, it looked like doll houses. I've never seen such a thing. Like you'd see a bathtub hanging out of the second story, and it was amazing.
So, did you get in and did you evacuate? I mean, when you went into your home, did you go down in the basement or something, or did you?
No, and that house, no, it was done. When we got home, it was done.
Oh, okay.
That's how fast that one was. Yeah.
Wow.
No, it just bam, 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 and it was happening as we were driving home in Reisterstown. And it was funny because we had the emergency radio on because, of course, we had nothing, no power or anything for actually over a week. And they kept saying, there might have been a storm in Reisterstown. Like the news couldn't even figure out. All they had to do was drive.
Yeah.
All they had to do was drive 10 minutes and they could see what happened in Reisterstown. But that's another thing about truth. And we kept listening to hear what, the real official word. No.
Nothing.
There might have been a storm, no confirmation of a storm in Reisterstown. And we thought, well, you got to be kidding me, right? You just have to drive here to see it.
Right.
It was
But
amazing.
so it's fascinating to me too, because I was talking to my aunt who lives in the Denver area, and we were having a conversation about how devastated Denver would be and how we get reports about the snowstorms and so forth. And she said, no, that's up in the mountains. That's not here. In Denver, we're fine.
That's amazing, because I always thought Denver was always buried in snow.
Yeah.
Like I would have thought that.
And she said, no, we're just fine.
That's amazing.
And so what we find, and this is one of the benefits of having been living in different areas of not only the country, but also of the world, is that you find out that the perception that you have originally is not what reality is. When you actually live amongst the people and so forth, you find out a different perspective altogether.
Yeah, really different. Yeah, we were in when we were in Buffalo, we were in, up until a few years ago, the biggest blizzard they had. It was a 48-inch snowfall in 24 hours. It was pretty significant. And it was hysterical because literally we had been winter camping and we drove home in the blizzard, again, for the bird. What is it about the bird? It was a parrot. And we're like, we can't leave the bird over the weekend. We have to get home. So we left in a blizzard, try to get home back to Buffalo. Very difficult driving. And if it wasn't for a lot of prayers and the 2 snow plows, the gigantic plows that came by when we were on the underpass, because you couldn't get off the road. You couldn't see anything. We just zipped in behind them and followed them all the way to Buffalo. So we made it back to our little garden apartment. This is way back when Mark was in grad school. And it was college, I should say, when he's getting his PhD. And so we made it, and the next morning we went to go outside, and we put on our snowsuits as if we were going to go skiing, like full skiing,
right,
top to bottom, because we had to go somewhere, and I couldn't get out. because I'm so short. So Mark had to go first, and it's like the Lord of the Rings when they're trying to get over the mountain of Kataris. He's like that, pushing through the snow so that I could follow behind him because I couldn't make it through the snow. I was like, that was a lot of snow.
Yeah.
That was a lot of snow. I'm not sure how that was reported because we didn't have a TV that week. Nothing was working, but
Oh, how funny.
that was pretty wild adventure.
Yeah. So when you opened up your door to go out, you literally had a wall of snow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was wild. That was wild adventure. It was beautiful.
How long were you without power after that?
Yeah, I think that was probably, and I can't remember exactly because that was a long time ago now. And we were young and wild, so it wasn't. We had just been camping, so really it wasn't a big deal for us.
It's a good thing you
Yeah.
weren't still camping, or
Right.
you may have been buried completely.
That's
right?
true. That's
Yeah.
true, actually.
Yeah.
That is a good thing. Yeah.
Well, wow. So, what would you advise somebody if, in having gone through all of these storms and so forth, and these natural disasters, what have you learned over that period of time that you would definitely do if you had known that at the beginning of your experiences?
Yes, I'm going back to grad school for a second in Maryland. On my way to a biochem class in grad school, and somebody stopped me and tried to give me lunch. He said, "You need lunch? Come on, have some lunch, and then we're just going to ask you to hold this sign and stand right here." I'm like, "I'm really busy, I can't do that." But I saw a bunch of kids, and they didn't care, and they were grabbing the lunch and eating it, and they had all their signs ready to stand up and hold these signs. I get home that afternoon, and at that time I did watch the news, and my girlfriend and I popped on the news, and there was this demonstration at the University of Maryland, demonstration. The students were all in an uproar about this or that. And I looked and I said, those are the steps where they try to get me to have lunch. That's where all those kids were eating lunch. That wasn't a demonstration. They fed them lunch and they stood them up with the signs. And they took a picture and made a news story out of what didn't exist.
Wow.
And I said, well, so I'm going to say, believe nothing that you see. Pray for that God will give you discernment so that when you do see something and you feel it's not right, listen to that little voice inside you because it's not right. If you think something's not right, it probably isn't right. It probably isn't. And God gives us ways to know that. Our guardian angels help us with that, and also that little conscience that you have inside.
Yeah.
Okay? So never just take something on a face value. There's just everything that they're spewing out there seems to today, especially more than anything, and in science we learned that in spades, there's an agenda. And it's usually not a good agenda for the human race lately, unfortunately.
Right.
So
It's interesting because John Rappaport in today's article was talking about what needed to be done in order to really verify. And he's talking about people's financial agendas, people's political agendas, all of these things that influence even your scientists. So that
heavily now, the scientists.
Yeah, and so that you don't necessarily take everything at face value. We really need to learn to trust, but verify at the same time. And
Yes.
Especially today, we're finding that out.
And don't use Google.
Don't use Google.
DuckDuckGo.
Yeah.
Use DuckDuckGo.
Yeah.
Because Google's so compromised. They tailor your search engine to what they want you to find. It's very clear
Right.
that that's happening.
Well, that's happening in a lot of our social media, so we do have to be careful and investigate. And also, nowadays anyway, I'm beginning to feel like you have to have hard copies of things that are most important to you.
That's
hard
true.
copies in books.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information we can keep in books, how to garden, how to various
Yes.
things that we don't do today because we take them for granted, because we've also gotten into this very comfortable lifestyle where everything's at our fingertips. Well, what happens if we lose electricity? how do you survive for a week or so? It's important to know how to do those things. And
Absolutely.
I'm going back to fermenting foods and growing
That's
things.
great.
It's kind of fun. It's really interesting. Well, this has been a fun hour with you, Marianne, and thank you so much for coming in and sharing us and helping us to understand that things are not always as are being reported in our mainstream news, and that we really need to investigate and find out otherwise.
And we should also be the reporter.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yes.
Get out there and get the information firsthand and share it.
Right. And take pictures when you can.
Yeah.
And,
a lot of people are
and
good at that.
Right. It is handy. We've got our cell phones, and we can take a quick snapshot and share. And also be aware that you can also manipulate those. And so watch out when you're watching
Good point.
the videos on that you're investigating and so forth, and make sure that you've seen a few other ones as well, so that they can't be necessarily altered.
Yes, to verify everything. That's right.
Right.
Dig, do the research. Be Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, exactly. So I would like to close this out in memory of a couple of great patriots that we've had in New Hampshire. One of them being Ed Nail, who was the head of the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. Ed and I go way, way, way back. We used to share an office together, and Ed was a bulldog when it came to election integrity, and he was always going out and finding hard copies of voter registrations and finding multiple people who had, or multiple cards that had the same name but different handwriting and other things that were askew. And he was trying to get the authorities to look at it and make a difference. Ed just passed away about a month ago. And just recently we lost another big, great patriot who would do just whatever he could, and that was Wes Chapman. And so I would like to dedicate this program of Seeking the Truth to both of these patriots, Ed Nail and Wes Chapman, two New Hampshire patriots.
Could I add one more patriot?
Sure,
She's
please.
from Massachusetts, but she's from the Liberty Chalkboard, Linda Zern, who was also lost in all of this battle that we're now under. God bless her always, and she was an amazing patriot, always out there, always supporting, always helping. They've many standouts, many.
So this is also a point that we need to close with it, which is you can make a difference. We're not all going to be on the front line somewhere, but we all have a purpose to fulfill. And that purpose may be making sure that you're raising good, strong children who are principled and who are investigative and who are just good citizens in your community. It may be that you are called to write letters to the editor. It may be that you are just told to talk to your neighbor and discuss things and find out things. You never know in your circle of influence how much impact you have, but you have a role to play, and I encourage each one of us to please step up and fulfill that calling. This has been Karen Testerman and Marianne Alliegro on Chic Chattin with Jocelyn.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.